Hi and welcome back to the AQA GCSE History Elizabeth I Revision Series. This is episode 3 and we're looking at the Elizabethan government. The Privy Council had two main roles in Parliament. First, they gave advice to the Queen and managed the administration of government. For example, they enforced Elizabeth's policies and oversaw different parts of the government, including religion, economy, the military, foreign policy and the Queen's security. The council was made up of around 20 men who were all chosen by Elizabeth. They were Elizabeth's closest and most trusted advisers. Some of the key ministers served in the council for years. Elizabeth didn't have to follow the advice of the council, but the councillors were expected to carry out her instructions, even when it went against their own advice. The Privy Council was very good at managing the relationship between the Queen and the rest of her Parliament. One of Elizabeth's favourite advisers, William Cecil, was particularly good at convincing members of Parliament to support Elizabeth's decisions. Some members of the Privy Council also sat in Parliament. They acted as royal spokesmen and helped to steer debates in the favour of royal policies. The Speaker of the Parliament was appointed by Elizabeth and overlooked the Privy Council to keep control over the events and decisions. Elizabeth had the power to summon and dismiss Parliament. She didn't really enjoy working with Parliament, so tried to use them as little as possible. She only called 13 sessions with Parliament in the 44 years of her reign. Parliament was not free to decide which topics they were going to debate. They had to have permission from the Queen to discuss matters of state, for example the succession, religion and the foreign policy. So the parliamentary business usually focused on local matters and social and economic issues. Elizabeth believed in divine right. This was the idea that rulers and monarchs were sent down to earth by God to govern their country. This belief gave her royal prerogative, the right to decide state matters without consulting the Parliament. In the Parliament there was the House of Lords, which was not elected and made of nobility and senior churchmen. There was also the House of Commons, which were elected, but only men who owned property over a certain value could vote. Also, the Crown could sway and control the vote as to how they chose. Parliament's main functions were advice, taxations and legislations. For taxation, when the Queen needed extra revenue, she had to ask Parliament's permission to raise taxes. For legislation, the Queen needed Parliament's approval to pass new laws, but she could bypass this function by issuing royal proclamations instead. For advice, the Parliament was an important point of contact between central governments and figures in the local governments throughout the country. It enabled the Queen and her councillors to gauge the mood of the country and the levels of support for her policies. When Elizabeth became Queen in 1558, Elizabeth made William Cecil her principal secretary. He became her closest adviser and led the Privy Council, making sure the government ran smoothly. In 1571, Cecil was made Lord Burghley by Elizabeth. The next year she made him Lord High Treasurer, which gave him greater control over the royal finances. Cecil continued to work with Elizabeth until his death in 1598. Cecil was a very highly skilled politician and administrator. Some argued that Elizabeth's success as Queen was much to do with Cecil's remarkable skill as it was Elizabeth's own talents. Other key administrators that helped Elizabeth included Nicholas Bacon, who was Lord Chancellor between 1559 to 1579, and Francis Walsingham, who became Principal Secretary in 1573. Throughout her reign, the MPs were worried about who would rule England after Elizabeth's death. They repeatedly tried to persuade Elizabeth to marry or name an heir. The MPs were also concerned about the threats to Mary Queen of Scots and the Catholic plots surrounding her. So the MPs tried to convince Elizabeth to take more radical action against Mary. Some of the Puritan MPs challenged the religious settlement and attempted to make England more Protestant. Occasionally, the MPs refused taxation to try and force Elizabeth into changing her mind on decisions that they didn't agree with. But Elizabeth never gave in to any kind of parliamentary pressure. She was always able to control over her Parliament. So that's the end of episode 3 of the AQA GCSE History Elizabeth I Revision Series. Next episode will be on Elizabeth and marriage. Thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed. Please remember to like, subscribe and leave any questions in the comments below.